All right, we're picking up now at the bottom of page 49. And the thing that they're pointing out is a new concept here. And I know that you guys, when we were learning your Java 2 stuff and you learned about event handlers and then you learned how to simplify them, and eventually got down to this thing called a lambda expression, which is a really simple little expression that was really powerful. Well, there's an equivalent here inside of this environment that they're going to show you, and this is actually something we're going to leverage to do some database work. This is possible thanks to that link architecture that they have. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to start taking basically little queries. And by giving things kind of like a generic little name, we're then able to kind of use like a simplified expression to express things. I guess that's kind of redundant, but the point is that we have a cleaner way to do some of the queries than we might have done in the past. All right, so the thing that we're going to do next here is we're going to be going to the browse controller, and we're going to change our action result here for browse to leverage it with that lambda expression. So if you can bring up that particular controller, which controller is that? I don't see one called browse. Right, so it's one of the methods inside store. I'm going to copy the whole darn thing. I mean, I guess I really don't need to, but actually, fine, I'll just grab the stuff inside along with the comment. And that's going to replace this statement. No, we're leaving the view. And just so we're clear, this is actually an extension of this statement. And I think it's easier to read this way because it's all in one line. And I think it's helpful to have the comment there just very simply because it explains exactly what it's doing. So it's going to get all the albums based upon a specific genre. Just a little bit different code. Save your code. Okay, so now it says that we can change the view that goes with browse. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to do that fast. All right, so we were looking at the store controller. We made that change. Now they want us to go to the store view, to the browse CSHTML page. And we're going to make a little bit of an adjustment here. We're going to leave the top few lines alone, but we're going to add to the bottom here another for loop. And I'm going to do the indenting since it doesn't seem to want to do it on its own. And then this looks very similar to what we did before, where basically it's just going to step through the list of albums and pull back the title. Pretty intuitive. Just make sure all the syntax and everything is the same so we don't have any differences in the application. All right. They want us to once again run the application, and they want us to like browse to a specific URL just to make sure that it's working. So let's do that. So I'm going to append to our URL store browse genre jazz. Press enter. Now, thankfully we didn't have to type this in, but it went into the database. It found the albums that fit into that category and pulled them back and listed them. Just a plain old list. There's no links or anything like that here. But you can anticipate from the development pattern that we've been doing that we're also going to make these links. And I don't know if that's even our next step, but it probably is coming up fairly soon. You can see that turned out just the way we wanted it to. All right, so I'm going to jump back over to Visual Studio. Oh, not that Visual Studio. I already have 2012 open. Sorry about that. Maybe I shouldn't have the icons next to each other in the toolbar. Let's hit our stop button. And then let's go back to the instructions here. All right, so we're going to make another change here. It says we're going to replace our dummy data with a database query which loads an album whose ID matches the parameter value. So where am I going to put this code? All right, and does it matter where in the store controller I put it? All right, so we're basically going to be replacing this method, and I did copy the whole thing. I'm just trying to make sure. And we're going to paste it in, and kind of like what we did before, where we're just basically changing the database syntax, we're doing the same thing here. Notice the different directive, though. We're pulling up the database, we're looking inside of all the albums, and then we're running a find method, and what we're doing is we're finding something with a particular ID, which is something we're going to pass through the URL. So we are going to do exactly that. So let's just copy that little string, make sure you save, launch the app, let it load up, append to the URL. So store controller, details, method, parameter being passed is the number 1. Press enter, and hopefully you came back with this result. So that's just basically the thing that has the ID of number 1. It seems to be working just fine. Let's go ahead and hit stop. And then they're showing you that URL. But I mean, isn't that a nice clean URL that works really nice, and it just shows the power of the application and how it's able to pull up that data.
Should I have the same one?
Hypothetically, you should have the same thing listed if your sample data is linked up correctly. Is it? Are you guys getting this one pulling up? I'm not really too worried as long as it's pulling something up.
I've got a Copeland celebration volume 1.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're looking at the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so apparently they must have changed your sample data. All right, now we're going to go back and we're going to update the browse view. So let's go back to views folder. Let's find browse. Probably already have it open. And then we're going to adjust that to match what we have here. Once again, we're using a helper method instead of just creating a simple list here. We're going to use that to help us create a link. So we have an action link working off the title. We're going to have some text that's going to display called details, and of course the instantiation of a new album object for the particular album ID that we're pulling in. And that's going to be a link. So it's going to be really a link to that particular object. All right. Go ahead, launch it again. And their directives are be able to browse from our store page to a genre page which lists the available albums, and by clicking on an album we can now view the details for that album. So let's do that. Go back to the application, go to Store, pick a category, pick an album, and we're in the detail view. That was not a lot of coding to get that to happen, right? And see, that's the part that you've got to start recognizing. Because we're writing code that's generic and is attached to specific actions on the screen, so we're dynamically pulling in a list, dynamically generating links to all the things in the list, showing all the stuff that's associated with it data-wise, and then all those things can be linked to as well using all those same techniques. Okay, let's go ahead and hit that stop button again. Back over to the tutorial, and they're showing you an example of if you navigate through what you'll find. All right, now we're about to enter into something a little bit more powerful in terms of the capabilities of the MVC, and really one of the things that makes MVC to begin with. Namely, the fact that we can use this thing called scaffolding. And scaffolding is something that allows us to build quickly the tools that we use to do a lot of the database and data manipulations automatically based upon the models that we have in place. All right. Now, the intent of what we're about to do is to set up a controller that allows somebody that's got the right access permissions to be able to edit the content, right? So it's cool that we have all these albums and artists and stuff, but what if the information is wrong? Or what if you get a new album? Or what if that one's no longer in print or something like that? You need to be able to make those changes. So we're going to create a new controller called Store Manager Controller. I'm just going to copy that so I don't have to mistakenly type it. So we're adding a controller. It's going to be called Store Manager Controller. Now, here's where we have to make sure our choices are correct. So for a template, we need a controller with read-write actions and views.
The options on that list, are they tied back to the MVC?
They are.
Okay, because there's less here than before.
Yeah, depending on which version of MVC you're using, you're going to have different options that appear. That is correct. So if you were using 4, 5, or 6, you would have a different listing of stuff. And I think, like you said, you probably have more of a list and you can still use the same ones, or you might have less of a list. It just depends on some of the options that you choose as you're building. The next thing that we want to do is we want to base this on the album class. So that should pop up in the list here. And then the data context is Music Store entities, Music Store models. We're going to stick with Razor. And then click Add. Now, from a conceptual standpoint, what's happening in the background, and I like that the author is putting it here, the scaffolding mechanism really is kind of a miraculous thing. It's really kind of one of the things that developers like about working with MVC, because it creates a lot of stuff for you automatically by just doing the selections that we made. We picked which models we're working with, the type of data that we're working with, gave it a name, hit an add button, and then when we take a look at that controller, it's telling you right here that it adds not only a bunch of stuff to the controller, it also adds a bunch of different views. So it adds automatically a create, delete, details, edit, and index view.
Do I need to add something in for my saying unsupported context type?
Okay, well, I'm getting an error too. So, yeah, so great. You guys are all getting the same error.
That's different, but it is weird.
All right. So and I think you're correct. Let's do a clean and rebuild first. So let's go ahead and just do a clean. Yep. And I'm right clicking on the project node, not the solution. So I'm doing a clean, and then I'm going to do a build. Remember, why that's important is it refreshes all the data components. So if there's changes in the data models, and we did do some stuff that changed. Now I'm not sure if that is the thing that's preventing us or not, but practice makes perfect. So we're doing store manager controller, entity framework. Which one did we choose here? Music store entities. Is that right?
Class was album.
Oh, album. Then music store entities models. We got Razor. Let's go ahead and click add. All right. So how many of you are getting this error? Like everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pause the video here while we try to figure out what's causing it and fix it. All right, so I did a little bit of investigation, and I went to Stack Overflow, and I was kind of careful about how I put in my search criteria. And given the fact that we've been copying code, right, and the code that we copied and inserted into the web config file, that code was generated with a previous version of Visual Studio. So when I put in the database connection string, it added a little tidbit here for a provider name. And the provider name that we cut and pasted in is, I put up here in my comments, is this one. But you can see that this version of Visual Studio 2012 puts in the provider name as this. So I just very simply took the old default one, copied that in to the provider name, and then I went back and went through the steps of right click, add, store manager controller, choose the album, and then this option here, click to add, and it worked just fine. So what I'm hoping now is that you guys can do the same. I'll pause the video for a sec just to make sure that you can, and then we'll come back and take a quick look at the stuff it generated. So a quick pause. Let's go back to our instruction set here. Now the point that I'd like to make is to show you all the things that the scaffolding created. So the first thing to look at is, let's actually look at the store manager controller. Now some of the other controllers that we create, the only thing that it throws in will be the index view by default, right? Notice here that the scaffolding went in and it created, gosh, it created a whole bunch of stuff in here. Holy cow, right? And if you look at what it's doing, well, there's the index view, and notice the lambda expressions, how it's pulling in stuff from albums. That's what we told it to do. Brings up the genre, the artist, returns a list of the albums that match. We have a details view that does a find, kind of like what we were doing before. It's got a create that allows us to instantiate a new object. It has an additional create that depends on what you're passing in. And then depending on what you're throwing in there, generates more content. It also allows you to pull stuff up and change it. And then notice that there's, one is to find it and one is to actually do the actual changes. And all this stuff is done automatically. Basically all your database CRUD operations, create, retrieve, edit, destroy, or update, destroy, those are all automatically generated by the scaffolding. We don't have to code it. And you see why developers love this? Because otherwise, you are hand coding it. And that's one of the exercises you often learn is to hand code this stuff. And yes, you can still hand code it. But if you know that you're working with a certain piece of data, and you can say, oh, this is the table I'm working with, and it's coming from this database, right? And these are all the connections the data has to all these other places. That's already pre-configured. I can generate a controller that can manipulate that data with all the standard database operations, but with a couple clicks of a button, right? So you can see the power of that, because applications often do that. So the fact that we can just hit a button, do the scaffolding that generates all those things automatically, huge. It's a huge thing. So at least I'm hoping from a conceptual standpoint that you see that, because really so much happened. The other thing, okay, those are the things that happen inside the controller. The other thing that we should do is drop down to the Store Manager view and notice that there is a separate view for each one of those CRUD operations as well. The default one, the index, right, creates a table. You guys should be, familiar with some of these Razor directives at this point. So we're creating basically a clean-looking layout for items inside the database. So, for example, the name of the genre, the name of the artist, the title, the price, the album art URL, all that stuff. Those are just displaying those fields. Here, we're going to have links that are going to allow us to actually link to the other operations, other database operations. If we start looking at all the others, and notice this is all automatic. It's basically just creating a form for us automatically that does all the work. This is to create, this is to delete, this gives the details back up on the screen, and this is just to change the content. Are you noticing also that all of these have these little lines of JavaScript at the top, which really are pointing to our jQuery libraries that are pretty easy to see that it's a jQuery library specifically tailored for validation. Not all of them have that. Which ones would have that?
That jQuery.
Yeah, details doesn't need it because we're not changing anything. We don't need to validate stuff that we're just looking at. If we're doing an edit though, and there's certain rules about what kind of data is going in, we have to, you're not going to put a string into a number field, for example. Okay, so and then create should also have it because once again, delete shouldn't have it. Well, that's interesting. And index won't have it. So that's all automatic. Okay, so we're just using the jQuery libraries to make that happen. All right, so the next thing that they have us do here is we're going to make some adjustments to some code. Actually, you know what? I'm not sure if we're in a viewable spot right now. Okay, so we're going to go to the Store Manager Index view. So I just happen to be on that page. That's handy. And they want us to make a couple of tweaks here. Remove the TH and the TD elements surrounding the album art URL. So really what they're saying is they don't want you putting it inside of a table header row. So here they want us to remove the TH from here, this whole tag, and the TD for album art URL. I highlighted it from the last time so I would remember. So both of those sections need to be removed. So I'm removing this. And I suppose if you want to be safe, You know what? You could comment it out.
Yeah.
Right, no harm done. Okay. Are you guys noticing that there's a little problem with the razor code there in the comment? Is that going to still execute?
Oh, yeah.
What should I do to comment it out?
The A.
Does that work?
Yeah, I think I
So how do I do a razor comment?
At, star, and lose star at.
what? Yeah, I just control KC everything. Control KU.
Control K C. Oh,
No, you have to highlight and then,
it's highlighted.
but it's already commented, so delete those comments and then.
Yeah, so, this is one of those situations the automatic, the built-in tools might help you, I guess, maybe a little bit more.
I just get used to it. Sometimes it takes 2 times to do it. So just practice.
Yeah, it doesn't want to cooperate with me.
It takes twice, but it's
Control KC, Control KC. There we go. It's just easier to type it after you do Control KC so many times. So we're just using the razor tags to do the commenting, and that's really kind of it. For my money, it was probably easier to delete it. But I suppose we're demonstrating another concept here, so shouldn't complain. First world problems. All right. Then they're giving you a snapshot here of the modified code. So what you might want to do is you might want to make sure that everything is matching up. So I'm just kind of doing a side-by-side here.
Mine, I tried to, I mean, it probably wouldn't work, but it said that when it was supposed to be on the list, which is what we just did, so this completion.
All right, our next step here, folks, bottom of page 57, is to go ahead and run the application and browse to the store manager page. So let's do that. Let's see if it works. Bring my window back over. And then I'm just going to append to the URL.
I tried it before, it did not like it at all, but it went into the list.
And I'll give it a chance to load up here. Yeah, it's like watching paint dry. All right, so now we're getting our error message that just disappeared on me here. All right. It says an error occurred while getting provider information from the database. This can be caused by the entity framework. And remember when we were paused in the video and I pointed out the little fact that I changed that provider in the web config, and the one instruction I saw in Stack Overflow is after I change it, create the controller and then change it back. So guess what I'm about to do? I'm going to go back and change it back. I'm going to hit my stop button here. So I'm going to, knowing that in my head and being smart, and I took that provider and I just dropped it into my comments so I don't have to go hunting for it. I'm going to come back in and I'm going to paste it back here. Give it a Control S. Come up to the root of my project. I'm going to do a clean. I'm going to do a build. And I'm going to try to execute it one more time. And now we have a list. So hopefully that worked for everybody. Now, given the fact that we're coming up on lunch here, I think we'll take a break at this point. But the thing that you should notice as well, before we adjourn, is the fact that it pulled everything back, and it also is giving us these links here. And I'm not worried about clicking on these right now, but that's all done automatically. Thank you, Scaffolding. Right? Do you guys see the power of what we're dealing with here? Those few of you, well, two of you that were in my Ruby on Rails class, you should start to see a little bit of a correlation. Because I know in the Ruby on Rails class, this is almost kind of like day one, right? You generate the application, throw in a couple of data components, a couple of them, the whole thing's there, and you're like, wow, how did this happen? But you can see that same capability is here. All right, we're going to take a break for lunch, folks, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to add to these videos and proceed in the project. But this one ends here.